Hello, and thank you everyone for joining us for That Solo Life, the podcast for PR pros and marketers who work for ourselves. I am Michelle Kane. My company is Voice Matters, and I am here as ever with my wonderful co-host, Karen Swim. She is the leader of our solo PR pro pack. And we are also excited to have with us Leslie Jennings Rowley. She is going to talk about her work with her company, Hereafter Partners. And it's led her to have a really fun nickname, which I'll get into at the end. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. Leslie is a respected organizational engagement leader and content producer with over 2 decades of experience in mission-driven organizations and a reputation for and track record of building new programs and sustaining key initiatives. She founded Hereafter Partners in 2019, and it is a purposeful organization that aims to make conversations about death, dying, and aging more normalized and accessible for younger cohorts of society, and in our little world for us solo PR pros, because we wear all the hats. And it has also brought her the nickname of the Death Lady. So, thank you for joining us, Leslie.
Thanks
Welcome.
so much, Michelle and Karen. Great to be here with you, and look forward to talking about death, which really is a conversation about talking about life and what's important to us.
It is. And I was telling Michelle beforehand that we call you the Death Lady, but we say it without all the doom and gloom, because you really are someone who helps us to celebrate our life and make sure that we take that celebration into the planning so that when we are in our after, our loved ones are not left behind trying to figure out how to celebrate our lives and missing things, and they don't know how we would have wanted to be honored. And we have all those hard conversations, but you make it accessible, practical, and fun.
We try to make it fun. Yeah. It's not everybody's, top on everybody's fun list, but yeah, we try to do that.
So how do you go about that? Just tell us what do you do as Hereafter Partners?
Sure. Well, as Michelle said earlier, I kind of came to this work with a particular cohort in mind. So if you look at websites and literature and other campaigns about getting your stuff in order or end of life planning, it really is mostly targeted toward those people in the final stage and age of their life. And this actually came to be a passion area of mine after the death of my father 6 years ago, but not right away. When you're in the throes of helping someone through hospice and the really last stages of life, you're just bombarded with, or at least I was bombarded with, all these unknowns. I had no idea what I was doing. I felt as though I was doing it in a vacuum, doing the best I could and second guessing everything. And then, by the way, when it felt, quote, over, I ran back to my own life, which was at the time 2 small kids, a full-time job, and, trying to piece back a number of weeks, months, whatever, to a semblance of normalcy. And I knew that my life had been changed by that full experience, but I didn't have time to process or deal with that. Luckily, I didn't have a lot of grief at the time because my father had been very clear about what his end of wishes were and what path we were on. So that was a blessing. But there I was doing my whole life thing. And come 5 years later, my mother-in-law was seeing that she was at the very end stages of her life. And we started having these same conversations. And I saw my husband navigating that across the country with siblings. I'm an only child and was fairly close. So that was a different dynamic. And he was dealing then in the aftermath with executorship. And I just saw, we are recreating the wheel. And why is that? And it's because, yes, there are resources out there that one could scour the internet or read tons of books. But first, they're not really aimed at that sandwich generation person who's juggling their own lives and their own children and their own work life and their elder statesmen, there are other generations. It's really not for us yet. It doesn't feel like it's for us. And it's all disparate in little corners of the interwebs. So I decided that just shouldn't be. And I wonder if anyone else would want to talk about death. And I put out a call to my larger social and professional circle and said, anybody that wants to come to a very different kind of Cinco de Mayo party should come to my house. And instead of 8 people responding, 56 people responded and said, all in their 30s, 40s, some 20s, peppering is of 50s. And I saw there was not only a real desire and need, but it came from being asked. We need to put the invitation out there for younger people to start talking about death that hopefully is years away for themselves and for their loved ones. But first, we start with conversation, like getting people okay with talking about our own mortality and recognizing that if we talk about death, that does not mean we're asking it to come early. I don't believe in jinxes that way. I haven't seen those play out. And there are so many benefits from getting people with, heart-centered conversations, valued-centered conversations about death. And then you can start looking at checklists of saying, okay, have I done the financial things? Have I done the medical things? Have I really looked at that spiritual part or the family part? And so we try to provide, yes, those checklists, but really before the checklists come some real deep reflection about what it means to live a good life so that you can ultimately die a good death.
Mm-hmm. You know what I really love about the demographics that you just described, that these are, younger people and death is not imminent. They don't have, health issues or diseases, and they're not staring it in the face, is that it takes that conversation about end of life to a different place, because you're right. They so frequently happen in a hospital room when there's an event and you're expecting it. And that is so filled with emotion and grief that I also believe that it alters the decisions that you make, and you're completely reacting to the moment. But by removing the imminency of the situation, I feel like it allows you to have richer conversations, be a better planner, be far organized, because there's no emotion, because you're not going to die. It's not like you have a terminal disease and now you're, processing all of that along with having to make these decisions. So, I love that you're advocating for normalizing having these conversations outside of that realm.
That's right. And I'm not the first person to think of this. There is definitely a growing, what some people call a death positive movement, to be thinking along these lines of putting death together, wrapping it into life, in investigations and discussions. But what I'm thinking is kind of new and novel is not just having the conversations, getting the resources, but really adding that accountability piece to say, I bet having a will or revising your will or looking at your will is on your to-do list. It's on your mental to-do list. I'm sure it is. Everybody. We know we have to do it. We even want to do it because it feels like the right thing to do and will give us some sense of mental security. But it's so far down the list. I mean, we have so many things to do. And frankly, who wants to put that at the top of the list? Confronting one's mortality is not something we, particularly in the West, are accustomed to doing. So, I think part of what I can provide and, our partners can provide are these like little nudges to say, okay, you said you're going to do it. Now, taxes are behind you. Let's have a 5-week drumbeat to get you to think about getting your advance directive signed and sealed. And let's, it's done. Yeah. Until next year when I ask you to look at it again. But still, I think that's the piece that we're trying to add to the landscape.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I want to, so you said that what evolved out of personal experiences over time, the death of both your dad and then your husband's mother, but you also have a second career and another business as a content producer and engagement specialist. So tell us, and you're still doing that. Are there any lessons, because you're wonderful about articulating the messages, but are there any lessons from that business that you have been able to leverage and utilize in Hereafter Partners?
Oh, for sure. And I think those, it's everything that your audience thinks about daily. Those, what are the messages that we need to get out there? And then how do we put them in front of a person when they're ready, in the mindset that they're currently in, even if it's not the mindset we need them to be in when they're making that, purchasing position or in this case, doing position. And so a lot of those skills that I've used in many nonprofit organizations over my career certainly come to the fore. And when I was thinking about this, your audience in particular, I just wanted to kind of point out that, as I said, we mentally know we need to do this. And one of the benefits of actually doing it is not so much that, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, everybody that around me that I know and love will be fine. There is such a mental load that is lifted when you know that you have an advance directive that spells out what kind of medical treatments in your, when you're in times of need you want and what you don't want, and you've named someone to be able to speak on your behalf. That work that needs to be done is it's difficult in the moment, but once you've done it, it prepares you, and that your loved ones aren't going to have to do those last minute scrambles or thinking or worrying and wondering. And just a piece of information that I just found astounding that I read, it was based on a study in, I think 2017, but published and talked about by Dolly Chug in her book in 2018 on being better people. And it's this statistic that in U.S. companies, $75 billion, over $75 billion is lost in productivity per year due to what they call hidden grief. And hidden grief not only is, certainly what I think our entire society has been facing this year with racial reckoning and coronavirus, fallout. But these elements of, I don't know what my dad wants, and he's asking me to go through medical procedures with him and advocate on his behalf. And I cannot focus on my work. I cannot focus on these things that are being asked of me because I haven't had those conversations. And if we get all of that out of the way earlier, as you said, Karen, before that kind of stress of the here and now happens, I think that number of, productivity dollars lost will go down. But it's just this mental accounting that we, will be so much the richer for having done.
Because there are stats around how this impacts productivity, should companies be taking a greater role in being more proactive and not just giving you, and honestly, they don't give people enough time to grieve. And they also don't give people enough time to, have a new child, but that's a whole other conversation. But should companies be more proactive in offering these services to help people make these preparations? Because some of the assets that companies give to people are also impacted at the end of our life. I think about 401k plans and any life insurance policies that you may have. So, talk about that and talk about, how can we get corporate America to enter this conversation and be a part of it?
Okay, Karen, I'm going to have to put you on my payroll because this is Hereafter Partners 2.0. And, we've been around for 2 years doing really grassroots level, workshops and this sort of thing for, different kinds of groups, student groups, community groups, friend groups. But my real passion is doing exactly what you said, making sure to scale this properly. I think it does need to be at that corporate level that says we have these benefits for other things. We do even have, some very forward-thinking organizations have some semblance of, legal benefits or, legal consultative benefits. And there are, grief days and that sort of thing. But there is no holistic look at life and death planning. And, there are wealth planning things that you're dealing with, your 401k all the time. But as you said, those dovetail into all sorts of decisions. Long-term care insurance goes one way. But what does it really mean when dad dies mom has never balanced a checkbook or can't drive anymore, or all of these things. What are the services at your disposal? How do you even find out what those services are at your disposal to make that plan work? Now, that, unfortunately, I think people are thinking about that in that decision-making state. I need to know this now.
Yeah.
That might be 2.0. Where I want to get is the 3.0, which is let's have this holistic package of benefits that says, let's plan when you're just starting your job, or in another situation, when you are getting married, when there are these life change kind of situations, how does that impact the way you're going to think through life decisions and all of these kind of the checklist things, as well as where your values are. I think for independent professionals too, among those who are listening, this is something that it doesn't exist. Don't feel like you're missing out on the corporate side, because it doesn't exist. But when you are thinking about kind of putting your long-term plans together for your business, this impacts business too. And so there's the succession planning, if you will, or what is the question about what's going to happen to your business if you are incapacitated, because this isn't just about death. This is also about health. And, we're living in a very medicalized society, for good or bad. And what that means is we are living with conditions that are chronic that also have impacts. So I think it's something that, solopreneurs, or, small entrepreneurial businesses need to think about, not to be scared about, but I think it's something to put in your toolbox.
So if we had to, for our solos, because we're pretty much all type A and like to plan, even though planning for this is, as you say, it's not something you look forward to, or you think, oh, I don't know who's going to want my stuff. But for us, just to have, what would you say are the first three things that we should put on our to-do list to just start this process?
Yeah. Well, again, this sandwich generation, right? We are caught between the things we know we need to do for ourselves, and likely in many situations, the things we know we need to do for those that are a generation above us. And it's like, I use that airplane oxygen mask analogy. Like, we really do need to put our own mask on first. And so if you force me to say three things, I would put them all in one.
Five.
Okay, well, I'll start with the three. And the three are all lumped into getting an advance directive together. And let me do definitions. So advance directive really is any legal document that you put together before needing it to outline the care that you would like at a time when you are no longer able to be vocal about decisions that need to be made on your behalf. And also in questions of, when is life no longer worth living to you, or at a point where you feel as though medical intervention is not the path that you want, or is the path that you want. It's not about like, I don't want to continue. It's maybe you want all the bells and whistles, and that just needs to be, put down in a document, and someone is named your medical proxy. It has different names in different states. So the three things I would say in that are, first, Google right now kind of state-specific advance directives. There are a number of organizations that keep those up to date. The National Hospice and Palliative Care Association organization is one of those, but you'll get that by Googling. It is a state-by-state kind of form that you'd need to fill out. And then the second thing is, think about who that person is that you would really trust to understand the values that bring you to a set of decisions, because it's not going to be, no one really needs a document that spells out, if I, lose consciousness because of this is what you do. It's more flowchart, less list, bulleted list, right? And so you need to find someone who understands kind of where you're coming from in life about what is important and what values are foremost for you. And then the third thing is, put on your calendar a time to go on a walk with that person, or take that person to tea and say, I know this is weird and awkward, but I trust you, and I want to start having a set of conversations about what's meaningful. And our website has kind of prompts, conversation prompts that you can download and start thinking about that. So that would really be my first thing. And then I think your audience is really set up with the skills that they have in connecting people and understanding messaging and where people are coming from. They're really set up to start having those conversations with their loved ones. So that would be, 2 and 3, or 3, the second part, 4 and 5 of those things to do. And recognizing that everyone has different on-ramps for what's going to feel comfortable. The one nice entree with having done your own directive is to say, hey, I just did this. And it led me to realize I don't really know what your wishes are, or, who you really feel like the right spokesperson is. It doesn't have to be me, but I want to be understanding of where you're coming from with this. And many people won't have even started. So that's just a way down the path. But when you do start the conversation, maybe that, this relative is much more about opening up the file drawer and saying, well, these are my taxes for the last 7 years. And I do all the things by the book. So then you might say, okay, well, here's a form and let's go through a form. There may be other people that are like, I don't really want to think about death. I want to hold on to my memories and my family, and all of that's more important. So maybe it's more legacy of, okay, well, I've never written down those recipes. So let's just start there. And then you can start conversations about what really matters, and ultimately get to signing documents and things. But, maybe you just need to take a different PR tack, if you will.
There we go.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah, within what you said, and just from my personal experience too, the importance of any of us having set up, and I know you touched on one of those docs, different powers of attorney, medical, financial, because the time when you absolutely need them is never going to be the expedient time to make them happen, because you will often need attorneys and notaries and lots of people. And if you are a loved one is not mobile, it's really challenging to even think about having that happen.
Yeah. And we've been developing checklists, and it's kind of fun. And it's a rabbit hole, actually, when you start.
You're making it fun.
If you start thinking like from these kind of dry, vanilla, legalistic things, okay, I have to fill this out. But then you start thinking, oh gosh, what's going to happen to my cat? Or, only I know the kind of, food that dog likes, or, if actually I were in a medical facility and someone had to come into my apartment, they might not even know I have a cat, because that one's always under the couch if new people, so to lay out all the things that somebody might need to know in a caregiving situation, not just a death, end of life. It's really kind of, you just start scratching the surface, and then you realize, oh, wow, there's so many things I could think about, like digital assets, like who, I talk to young people and they're like, well, I don't have an estate. I don't have any assets. I'm like, oh, do you have a Facebook account? Do you have any Bitcoin? Do you have any, and they're like, yeah, well, you have digital assets and we need to know how to get into them. Oh, I can just give people my password. Well, actually, Facebook could shut that down. So there are ways that you need to kind of think about both legally and practically. Yes, you could certainly, someone should know where your passwords are. That sort of thing, and like online banking, all those things. So it's just, it feels like there's a never ending list of things to do. But once you start doing them, it's kind of like, oh, I did that. Oh, let me investigate this thing. Oh, I did that. And then you kind of feel like I'm getting a handle on it. We might never get the full handle on it. I was telling these ladies before we started recording that my mother-in-law was like the consummate organizer, and almost the second I met her, she was like, oh, and here's the filing cabinet that has all of the end of life stuff and all my records and all how you access this or that. And I was blown away. And then she died, and we had no idea what hymn she wanted at her service, where she wanted donations to go instead of flowers. And you don't have to get to that level of granularity because she was so clear of other things. We could make pretty good guesses about that, but it was still that level of, oh, wow, if I had, had one conversation about this. So now I have my playlist and I have like all the stuff that of course will need to be revised because, do I really want Michael Jackson I know it's not Michael Jackson, but whatever it is, it may change over, a lot of these things may change over time. And that's the other thing. Even with advance directives and wills and trusts and whatever legal documents, those are changeable. They are changeable. So it doesn't have to be that, well, I don't know. Well, do your best guess now. And then put a time on your calendar. I keep saying inauguration and the start of the Olympics. Those are two things to just kind of like, every time there's one of those, let's do this revision. And
I love that.
Yeah. So
I love that.
Olympics are coming up, so you got an extra bonus year of waiting. So now no procrastination is. And
I think with COVID, we all probably needed that bonus year.
But it also put a fine point on needing to do this, frankly.
Yes, and our friend Chip Griffin, I love this comment from him, is that not only about keeping track of your documents, but reviewing them from time to time because relationships change and the person that you wanted to be your medical proxy 10 years ago, what if you are not even speaking, God forbid. So it may not be the same. So I think, just putting, the same way that we know that when the time changes, you change the batteries in your smoke detector, it probably needs to be an annual review of your documents and of all the people that, are in charge. So
I think annual is a little ambitious. People don't want to think about death that much. So inauguration, that's my thing.
You need to look at it every year. I mean, because, think about this past year and how dramatic life changed and the world changed. So, I mean, I feel like if you do it every year, then it just becomes habit. It's just, you're building the muscle for it and it's not that big of a deal. I mean, we look at our health insurance every year. We look at a lot of things annually. Why not just slot it all in and just do a document review every single year and be done with it? And then it's not so onerous because I feel like if you wait 5 years, that's too long. And then it becomes a big thing. That's the way that my mind works anyway, is that let's make this as habitual as we can.
Okay, and you're never gonna get anything. So like every other year you might find this other thing. Oh, he's the beneficiary. He's been dead for 7 years. Like,
why did I do that?
My father was the beneficiary of one of my something. I was like, he's been dead for years now.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's true. So what has surprised you in your work with Hereafter Partners?
The real care that people are giving to thinking about what's important to them when they finally get in the mindset of doing it. And no one has asked just give me the playbook. They recognize that. I mean, some people want the checklist right away. And I'm like, no, we got to do a little talking first. But most people recognize there is no one flavor for this. Everybody comes at their mortality having experiences with death or not experiences with death, having trauma of many different kinds, or thinking one thing is very important to them when another would look at that and say, this other thing is more important to me. So I've been surprised at how, deeply people are really taking this seriously, which is great. I mean, I'm overjoyed by that. So I think that's it.
That's wonderful. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I think we have reached the end of our time. My God, that flew by. And
you made it fun.
Yeah,
it is. It can be. It can be.
Yeah, I think that we really should normalize having these conversations. And you said your statistics about how it impacts productivity, I know includes solos. And that's particularly top of mind these days for me, as I have really had to embrace how the world and the stress of the external world has impacted my own, my thinking, my clarity, my productivity. I'm having to allow myself extra time to get things done and give myself a little more grace. And so, and I think it's a time when we're all more aware of our mental health and how that really affects our work. And so removing these things that we don't have to make decisions about or that we don't have to think about is a relief. And it takes away a little bit of stress of our lives. And having been through far too many situations where there wasn't pre-planning, I can say it's far better to come into a situation knowing and having documents that you can turn to so that you're not trying to figure that out while you're also just trying to be there for the person that you love, or having your family be there if you're the one who needs to be cared for.
Yeah, I would say that the greatest gift you can give the people that you will be leaving behind is to have as much in order as possible. Now, and I know pre-planning your funeral itself could be a little disconcerting, but just the ease, as we touched on earlier in our time together, because you're not in your right mind when you're readying to say goodbye to someone. And certainly if you're the one, you're in no position to say, well, let me just run down to the post office one more time.
Right. And then, I mean, there is that last added benefit of being clear about what you value now and believe that you will value later. Gives clarity to how you're going to live your life, so that when you are reflecting at the end, you've lived the life that you're proud of. And I think there's something to that. We hold a bi-monthly book discussion group, and we're always, kind of reflecting on, well, we are so much talking about life, and people, many people that sit with dying people say they die they die the way they lived. Right. And if we're not really consciously thinking that way of prospectively, like how will we feel looking back? I think that's a disservice to ourselves. So I would suggest, just giving a thought. And there are lots of great works out there. Atul Gawande's Being Mortal is like I think the one that I would put people to most. There's another beautiful book by Catherine Mannix called With the End in Mind. And I think it just helps give that reflective moment to, am I living it right now the way I'd want to be remembered? And I don't know you guys very well, but I think you're living great lives and you'll be remembered well. So thank you so much for having me on the program. It's been really great.
Well, we really appreciate your time.
Yeah. Tell people how they can find you, Leslie.
Sure. We are at hereafterpartners.org. And if you go to the resource section, there are free downloads and blog posts, and you can always use our contact box to get in touch with us or join our e-newsletter. So hope that it's helpful to anybody.
Absolutely. Great. Absolutely. Well, we thank you so much. And we thank our listeners too for joining us, whether you've joined us live today or you're listening to us on the podcast. So please, subscribe if you feel so inclined. And if you feel that this episode has a lot to offer, which guess what, it does. So share this around. And until next time, thanks for joining us for That Solo Life.